Hello, hello. Happy Friday. Happy Juneteenth. And welcome to an impromptu organic office hours, our recurring, if not always predictable, live series where I answer real questions from real marketing and content leaders inside companies about AEO, GEO, SEO, and this wild world of AI search and discovery in which we now find ourselves. My name is Tyler Hakes. I run the SEO and AEO consulting firm Optimist. We have spent the last 10 years helping B2B tech and SaaS companies grow, scale, and build organic growth engines. And I'm really excited to dive in today. First of all, I should say I am. This is my best red, white, and blue. So if you're rooting for the USA, that is why I have weird sunglasses on my shirt. In fact, let me just take that off. But yeah, I'm really excited to dive in today. I pulled together some questions that I've been getting from a few conversations with clients and prospects over the last few weeks, and I want to dive into those today. But I will also say this: love to answer questions that I get from folks on LinkedIn or whoever's watching our live stream. So if you have questions about the state of SEO, what's going on with AEO, which acronym should I land on, anything like that, I'm happy to give you my best answer. So please feel free to post those in the chat or in the comments here on the live stream. I will grab those. I may not have a chance to go through them today live, but I'm actually going to be hosting another organic office hours next week. So send me those questions. I'd love to help answer those or provide clarity wherever I can. Okay, so let's jump right into it with our first question. Okay, so let me just adjust my screen here. Okay, so this is a question that I get quite frequently from prospects, especially as we're having initial conversations. We're sort of benchmarking. We're doing initial analysis to understand the brand, where they currently have visibility, where they don't have visibility across SEO, as well as the various AI models. And so, one of the questions that I get from a lot of folks is, we don't have the resources of our big competitors. So, how much can we actually gain in this market? Versus like what's just unattainable because we're a small fish in a big pond. Okay, so this is an example of kind of a ranking, if you will, within a specific vertical here, where the client that I was talking to, they were sort of middle of the pack. And most of the big companies with the highest level of visibility across their industry and their vertical were essentially billion-dollar, behemoth enterprise types of companies, right? You can see in there, Verizon Connect is one of their competitors, as well as some other big companies and like unicorns, as well as private companies that were looking to IPO. So just at sort of a different scale than what their business is currently at. And so we talked through this. We sort of did like a deep dive on the analysis and really tried to understand, like, basically how do we answer this question? How do we figure out what is sort of an attainable benchmark or goal for AI visibility? In most industries, it's not 100%, right? So you're not going to show up 100% of the time. In every prompt, right? Even if you're running the same prompts, if you're asking for recommendations within a specific industry or for specific use cases, that kind of thing, it's very rare that a single company will show up 100% of the time, because LLMs are probabilistic, right? They tend to change. I know Rand Fishkin and some other folks did some great research on this, where the list of brands that are being recommended for any given prompt, for example, will change almost every time you run that same prompt through the same model. So it's, the first thing to recognize is that the goal here is not 100%. Almost never is that the case. But what we actually can find here is that the behemoths, if you will, or the larger companies in your space, kind of give you an idea of like what is sort of an attainable ceiling potentially. Not to say that you couldn't potentially exceed that number, but it gives us an idea of like what's a sort of a benchmark that we can peg our growth to. So in this case, right, this company, they landed here, as I said, kind of in the middle. Their visibility score, based on our analysis, was about 15% compared to their top competitors, which were closer to 45%. So it's about a 3x gap there. And And so what we ultimately landed on is, hey, based on the deeper analysis, based on sort of where those gaps exist and what we think is sort of an addressable thing that we can solve, uh, notwithstanding sort of a question of overall brand presence and authority and those types of factors that go into this, we think there's like a 2x opportunity here. So basically, we think you can move from where you're at now to around 15% to kind of this middle pack of the second tier, right? So this many of their competitors landed in this sort of second tier in kind of the 30%, 30 to 35% range. So based on our analysis, essentially what we told the client is, hey, we think there's a chance here to 2x based on a strategy and a roadmap and a plan to improve your visibility based on kind of the factors that you control. We don't necessarily think there's like a short term opportunity to necessarily leapfrog a competitor. Or the top competitor, I should say, in this case. But ultimately, it comes down to understanding where you sit versus your competitors, but also understanding why you are in that position. What are the actual gaps? What are the things that you would actually need to do to improve your visibility? And how much opportunity is there for you to grow your visibility from where you are right now? A couple of points I'll mention here that we talked through as we were having this discussion. Number one, AI is sort of more forgiving than SEO in many industries. I'm using that term loosely, but the idea here is, many brands overperform in AI versus SEO. So we do see in many industries and many verticals where a fairly small brand or even a fairly new company can match or even beat the visibility of a much larger or entrenched incumbent. And so what that tells us is that like there's just a lot of there's still a lot of movement happening in AI, and so there's still an opportunity for a lot of brands to really sort of uh, jump on this opportunity and really solidify their position or improve their position now, while things are still relatively in flux. We don't know what will happen, of course, in the future, but it's likely that the answers and the models will become more entrenched. It will be more like SEO, where the companies that have sort of invested for years and years in this will be harder and harder to unseat. That's my professional opinion. Based on what we've seen in SEO over the last 10 years or so. Likely that will also happen in the AI space. Um, the second thing I want to point out here is that authority still matters, right? There are brand visibility elements. There are elements of your brand that still matter, just like in traditional SEO, where to some extent your rankings are a function of your overall authority as a website and as a brand. That being said, it's more of a long-term lever in my experience with AEO. It's less of like an immediate hurdle. So there's almost never a case where we talk with a client and I tell them, hey, you just have no shot here. Your competitors are too big, they have too much authority, and your authority is too low. And again, in many cases, we find Series A, Series B companies that are fairly new that already have AI visibility. Sometimes that's even on par again with those entrenched competitors. So authority, I think, is less of like an immediate hurdle or a high bar that you have to get over as a brand when it comes to AI visibility. And it's more about how do we sort of shore up the fundamentals. So last couple bullets points here. Number one, realistically assess your current visibility versus your most immediate competitors. Don't just like ignore those Goliaths and sort of write that off and say, hey, we're never going to get to that level because we're not $1 billion company and they are. Again, in many industries, there's an opportunity there for even small time players to have an outsized impact and outsized visibility. And lastly, understanding those real gaps in content and visibility at like the topic level. So one of the things that we do with clients is we sort of drill in deeper than just sort of taking an overall snapshot of your visibility. But what we actually do is we look at the specific gaps that exist. Why is our visibility below our competitors, and in which specific areas are we relatively strong and relatively weak? And what that usually gives us is a roadmap to say, okay, can we fill in these gaps? And if we do, then we of course have a lot of opportunity to grow our overall visibility if we address specific gaps based on specific topics where we're relatively weak compared to our competitors. Okay, so that's the first question. If you don't have the resources of your big competitors, I don't think that's a barrier right now. I think the window might be closing, but realistically, there's a chance that you can unseat many of these big incumbents. So don't let that deter you. Don't let that change your perception of sort of the opportunity here around AI search and AI visibility, I think it's a great time to be investing in this now and really trying to build that visibility immediately. Okay, so the next question that I want to talk through today: which AI models should we actually optimize for? Okay, so obviously there are several leading LLMs and models that people are using and that people are measuring when it comes to AI visibility. So the question that I get a lot with clients and prospects is, should we be looking at all of these? Should we only be looking at one of them? Should we be focusing on specific models? And so when we do our analysis for clients, this is one of the first things that we look at is, in addition to sort of again your overall visibility, your competitive visibility versus the other players in your space, which specific models tend to do you appear more frequently, and which models are you weaker? And there are a couple of reasons why we do this analysis. Number one is because there are a lot of times it sort of gives us some hints about some of the strategies and the tactics that we need to pursue here. For example, AI overviews visibility is strongly linked to sort of traditional SEO performance, not in every single case, but generally speaking, that's what we see. When we look at things like Perplexity, it tends to over-index on things like original data sources and sort of provenance of data and insights. So there are sort of these nuances to each model, and so understanding like our relative performance gives us kind of a better idea of like what are our strengths likely to be as a brand, and how do we leverage those so that they work across the models that matter. Because one of the things that we do run into is that we have an example like this where, hey, our strongest visibility is in Perplexity, but maybe our customers don't actually use Perplexity, so that's not really helpful for us. And so it helps us again kind of just steer the strategy toward the models and the AI services that are going to be the most valuable for the business. So which AI models should you actually optimize for is really a function of your business. So focus on your buyers, right? So we know, for example, corporate buyers and executives are more likely to use like Gemini. For example, consumers tend to use ChatGPT. And then kind of the IC and the mid-market buyers tend to default to like a Claude or like a mix of Claude and ChatGPT. So we know generally based on your audience, which models are likely going to be the most important or the most impactful in terms of driving visibility across those particular models. But growing your aggregate AI visibility is generally the first order of business. So in a case like this, right, where we see a client like this, where hey, the max visibility that we have is like around 20%, and our competitors have much higher overall visibility across all models. What that tells me is like let's not get into the weeds of like trying to optimize for ChatGPT versus Perplexity versus Gemini at this stage. Let's focus on building the fundamentals, really shoring up the issues that are going to help improve our visibility across all of the AI models first and foremost. That's almost always the first sequence that we recommend in this case. And we do tend to see that, the idea of like a rising tide lifts all boats. So, essentially, as your visibility in ChatGPT increases, we generally would see a correlated increase across other models like Perplexity, Gemini, Claude. So again, that being said, there are nuances, right? So as your sort of program matures, if you find that hey, the models that we really care about are really where we're the weakest, that kind of thing, then you can start to shift the strategy and the approach to get more precise, to really get more tactical about how do we optimize for this specific model or this specific AI surface. But in most cases, that's down the line, right? Like that's not priority number one for most brands. And so I wouldn't spend a lot of time agonizing over your visibility in one model over the other than to use it as sort of an input in understanding your current state and sort of mapping the roadmap of priorities moving forward. And when in doubt, I just generally recommend that folks just kind of default to prioritize the defaults, right? So based on kind of overall user base, most likely the case is like AI overviews is going to be most important because most people are going to see AI overviews or AI mode via Google. Then ChatGPT, I believe, is still generally the leader in sort of user count overall, followed by Claude, and then you kind of have your long tail of Perplexity and Gemini. Sometimes some companies are even looking at Grok or DeepSeek, that kind of thing. But these are generally the models that are going to be most important to most companies, most businesses in that rough priority order. All right, let us go to question number 3. Should we focus on Reddit as a lever to improve our AEO? Okay, so this one hopefully doesn't get me in too much hot water, because I know there are many conflicting opinions and schools of thought about this. I have spent a lot of time studying the correlation between uh, Reddit and like forums more broadly and AI visibility. Um, my very quick takeaway is that Reddit is not a priority for most companies. Okay, uh, that being said, I'm not to say that it has no influence or that it doesn't matter or that it's not potentially worth investigating in some cases. But I think many of the studies that talk about Reddit as sort of um, an outsized source or a site that is being a website that's being cited frequently by LLMs, I think many of those data sets are skewed in specific ways that won't actually apply to most of the companies that we work with, right? So again, keeping in mind, we work in the B2B tech and SaaS space. We're not generally working with like consumer retail brands, things like that, where maybe there's a different story to tell there. But a lot of times what I find when I really poke in under the hood, look at the data myself, or dig into one of the reports or studies that have been published on this, is that Reddit citations tend to show up in a consumer types of investigations, or consumer prompts, right? So people looking for information about bicycles or basketballs or whatever, right? Not like B2B technology purchasing types of prompts. And B, Reddit also tends to show up more frequently in informational context, right? So places where people are just sort of gathering basic information about whatever random topic. Maybe it's how do I learn Spanish or like whatever, right? So something that is sort of more informational, less commercial oriented, less of like a high intent commercial discovery type of prompt. Again, that's based on my analysis. If you have other studies, if you've seen data that contradicts that, I'm always open to looking at that. So please share. A few caveats with this. So number one is it depends totally on your industry, right? I think one of the worst things that you can do right now is assume that somebody else's data study or somebody else's like list of best practices automatically applies to your business. Uh, there's too many factors going on in AI and AEO right now to really say, hey, this exact blueprint, this exact strategy, this exact ranking of factors applies to everyone, because I don't think that's like I don't think there's a way to really distill it down at that level. So what you really should be doing here is analyzing the citation patterns across your specific industry for prompts that are relevant to your specific buyers and your specific product category. Okay, look at those citation patterns to understand which sources matter the most. Analyze and then analyze which types of prompts cite these sources. Okay, so again, if you find that like, hey, everything, the only place where Reddit shows up is like this very, uh, sort of non-commercial informational type of prompt, then maybe that's not a place where you want to spend a bunch of your budget to try to improve your citation rate on prompts that are very distant from an actual purchase decision, which again, based on my analysis, that's generally tends to be the case. So just for context here to kind of ground this whole thing, right? This is a real analysis that I did for a prospect that we were talking to. They came on to a call with me, and they basically wanted to know what we did with Reddit to help improve their AI visibility. We had a hearty exchange about the efficacy of Reddit as an AEO strategy or tactic, and basically I tried to explain to them why we don't really do Reddit basically as an agency, and we talked through kind of the ins and outs and what I've seen across my career, and sort of how this mirrors some of the things that we've seen in SEO in the past. Long story short is I ultimately ran an analysis for them. We looked at something like 50 to 100 high intent, like commercial prompts within their space to see what are the actual sources that are being pulled into responses across ChatGPT and Google AI overviews in particular. And we found that Reddit and forums showed up in less than 4% of the actual sources being cited in those responses. Okay. So, overwhelming majority of the sources being cited are vendor owned pages. So, content on your website, listicles, product pages, documentation, the stuff that you easily control. And then the sort of second rung here is listicles and publishers. Now, this includes stuff that's sometimes on your website, but also, some of your competitors might, maybe they have like a, best SaaS software kind of listicle posts that the AI models are referencing. Sometimes it's like a publisher, like a G2 or a Capterra page that lists the best category software within a specific category. But as you can see, the overwhelming majority of these high intent, high value prompts for this specific business are being are pulling information from these two sources. They're not pulling data or information, at least not that they share, uh, from Reddit and forums. So again, I this is based on my real world experience. I've looked at, probably going on hundreds of probably over 100 companies at this point, done a lot of deep dives into citation patterns and uh, sourcing across different models and things like that, and I consistently see patterns that look like this. Okay, so that's my main takeaway here. The other thing that I'll just point out here is that I think the current tactics around Reddit are likely a gray hat bordering on black hat approach to AEO. So if you've been around the SEO world as long as I have, which I won't date myself by telling you how long I've been doing this in total, but as I said, 10 years running Optimist, we've seen so many quick win SEO strategies and growth hacks and stuff over the years, right? And it's always the same cycle. Something comes along, everybody does it to death, they abuse it, they see their rankings skyrocket for 2 months, maybe a year, and then everything comes crashing back down, right? You've probably seen even more of these types of case studies in the last like year or two with the advent of AI. But I think, overall, I wouldn't trust this as like a long-term growth strategy, especially the way that many companies, many agencies, not to shade other agencies, but many agencies are implementing this. It's just very shady. It's not the way that a real business builds a real brand, in my opinion. And so I would just be very cautious about it. Last thing, like with SEO, we just find that offsite signals tend to be like a second tier concern for most of the brands that we talk to. Again, not to say that they don't matter. Obviously, AI is looking at a huge range of factors and they're trying to sort of triangulate, is this a trustworthy brand? Should we put them in this prompt? Should we cite their website? There's a lot of trust factors and things that go into that. We can't possibly know exactly how those work. It's not a simple algorithm where we just know, A plus B equals C. But that being said, most companies that we work with, right, they're in that 15% bucket and they're trying to get to 30%. So the majority of the work and the highest leverage, highest priority work is almost always on your website. The things that you own, that you control, you don't have to go out to Reddit and like spam your company everywhere. And I wouldn't recommend that you start there. Maybe that's something that down the road, if you're neck and neck with your biggest competitor, you've sort of done everything that you can to really dial in your website and optimize your content. And we're still losing, or we're still trying to gain ground, et cetera, et cetera. Then maybe we start to think about some of these off-page factors like Reddit and that kind of thing. But again, I think beyond sort of the basic off-page factors like optimizing your social profiles and your G2 and your Capterra and really like dialing in your messaging and your positioning across the pages and profiles that you own and control. I think that's part of the priority one wave, and then everything else is sort of bucket two, in my experience, in my opinion. So when in doubt, focus first on what you control. I think that's good. That's good guidance for almost every company that I've talked to over the last 2 years or so. Okay. I just wanted to mention this really quick because this is our framework for how we actually approach SEO and AEO for clients, and I show this here because we explicitly don't, as I said, we don't do sort of off page, kind of the equivalent of AEO, of link building for AEO, if you will. We do look at off page through the lens of, as I just said, your G2 page, your Capterra your LinkedIn, like what is sort of your footprint across the web and how consistent is it? How well articulated is your messaging and your positioning? Are you listed in the right categories? Like all of that stuff, I do think plays a big role here. But that's really just at like sort of the level of like your competitive framing, your positioning, like where are you going to show up in the actual AI models and how is the AI going to talk about you? That's all part of your messaging and your positioning. And it doesn't necessarily touch like a third party like Reddit. But again, that's just based on my experience, based on my the work that we've done with clients. Uh, Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about today, the last question to go over is how are one person teams handling AEO and SEO? So we work with a lot of startups, generally like a Series A, Series B kind of range. And so in a lot of cases, it's a really lean team, right? Sometimes it's one marketer, one person doing marketing for the entire business across, perhaps dozens of channels or a dozen channels. And so, this is sort of the model that we've landed on that's been most helpful for a lot of the prospects and the clients that we work with. Not to say this is the right model for everyone, but tends to be sort of the best balance between quality, speed, efficiency, and like sort of getting the expertise without necessarily having the budget for like a full-time person dedicated to GEO or AEO. We call it a fractional package. Obviously, different agencies, different vendors call it different things. But it basically, the structure essentially looks like this. So as an agency, as a consultant, we sort of own direction and strategy. So we're doing the initial analysis, we're putting together the strategy, and then based on that strategy, we're putting together a detailed and sequenced roadmap. So we can say, here are the highest priority items, here are the things that we need to do, whether it's fixing stuff on the website, creating new content, updating existing content. We want to sequence all of that, right? So that's one of the highest leverage items that we can provide as a vendor for clients. A lot of times it's just, hey, here's 100 tasks, but here's the first three. Here are the first three things that you need to get done, because that is where a lot of people, I think, run into challenges because they're staring down a huge list of to-dos or a huge list of keywords or topics where they should be ranking or whatever. And the main question they ask is like, okay, but where do I start? What do I do first? What do I do today? And then what do I do tomorrow? Right? Like those are the questions that we get a lot of times. And so that's really a lot of the value that we provide is just turning that strategy and that analysis into an actual specific roadmap to say, okay, do these things in this order. For most of these engagements, we also handle reporting. So, we build like custom dashboards and help people continue to understand their visibility across these models and sort of adjust the strategy based on what the data is telling us. And then usually the handoff here is like a mix between like a production spec. So if it's like, hey, we need to update our schema and here's like what the schema should look like and how it should be deployed across your website. And we're handing that off to, the web team or just to the marketing person that we're working directly with who's implementing it on the website. Or then on the content side, it's a detailed content brief about how are we creating this content and how do we optimize that content from an SEO and an AEO perspective, or how do we update existing content to apply sort of the more modern best practices around content structure and this chunking idea and like all this stuff. So applying all that stuff and giving like specific direction about here's how your content should be put together, so that we sort of check all of the boxes across SEO and AEO. And also, how does this sort of fit into the narrative, right? That's one thing that I think a lot of people also miss here is that the content itself, it's not just a checklist, an SEO checklist, of the yesteryear, right? So when we think about AEO, AI models are much more sophisticated than SEO ranking models, generally speaking. And so the way that AI models understand content is fundamentally different, and it's deeper, it's more nuanced, right? So they're looking at like narrative construction, how well is your brand anchored to specific problems? How clear is the through line to say, hey, if you have this problem, you need this type of solution, and our brand offers that type of solution. Here are our features, here's our functionality, here are the customers we serve, right? How clear is that narrative? Because that's going to impact how visible you are in AI and also the pull through that happens in the actual response body itself. Okay, so when we're thinking about these content briefs, it's not just, hey, check these SEO boxes. It's how do we actually construct this content so that it contains that entire narrative, or the part of the narrative that needs to be contained on this specific page or within this specific piece of content. So that's really the level of direction that we're trying to provide to clients. What we find now is, many clients are moving, in-house, or they have some kind of an AI assisted system or Claude skills or whatever that they're using for the actual content creation. So in most cases, again, not every single company that we work with follows this exact model, and it's not going to be the right fit for every brand. But generally, the handoff here is that content brief with very specific and detailed instructions, and then there's like an in-house AI assisted system or workflow that they're using to actually turn that into long form written content that can go on the website. We also generally recommend in-house or embedded freelancers for things like content review and editing. I should say, unequivocally, I think, every piece of content should be human reviewed and edited. I have not seen a system that I would trust to push AI content straight to my website. And I spend a lot of time building a lot of things in Claude. So maybe I'm totally wrong there, but I have yet to see a system where I would feel comfortable just letting AI ship this content straight to my site. So there's always a human layer here. Again, generally this is in-house, if there's sort of capacity, or like an embedded freelancer who can really like get in the weeds deep on like the specific brand and the messaging, and make sure that everything is like really tight and consistent. That's a super valuable layer, of course, and really sets apart sort of the AI slop of the world versus high quality AI assisted content, which I think is the future, in my opinion. So that's what we see for lean teams, one person teams, startups. Especially that type of engagement, that type of structure tends to work the best. But we offer a couple other packages too. So again, depending on the type of client that we're working with, sometimes we do like an on ramp or like a ramp up period where we are doing more of like a full service kind of delivery. A to Z, and helping them kind of build the muscles internally and kind of set up their structure and get things off the ground. And then we also have like a lighter touch, like an advisory. So if you do have like an existing team in house, or you've got freelancers that you already work with, that kind of thing, we can provide kind of that high level of guidance and direction without necessarily getting all the way into the weeds of like directing the individual pieces of content and their execution and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it is a fascinating time. I'll say that as an agency, this model has evolved. We have traditionally always been like a full service kind of shop, done for you kind of service. But as AI has come along, and as teams have gotten sort of more capable, and frankly, as budgets have gotten leaner, there's less appetite to pay a full service agency to do end to end service in my experience. And so we've adapted our model, and this is what we've found that has worked for a lot of the teams that we're working with. Um, okay, so those are my 4 questions that I wanted to cover today. As I said, I want to answer your questions. So what questions do you have? What challenges are you dealing with? What myths are you trying to untangle around AEO, SEO, GEO, whatever acronym you so choose? Uh, I want to hear them. So either, first of all, post them in the comments here on this live stream. That would be great. Send them to me in a DM if you'd like to do that. If you want to remain anonymous, that's totally fine as well. Just let me know. But send those questions to me, and we're going to answer them next week. Okay, so we're going to have another one of these organic office hours next week at this same time on Friday. So June 26th, 12 o'clock p.m. U.S. Eastern time. Join me for another organic office hours. If you want to sign up to get email reminders so that you don't miss the stream here, go to yesoptimist.com/office. That should take you to the sign up page. If you're running any issues or for some reason can't find the sign up form, just give me a shout. But yeah, you can sign up for those reminders, and that way you can be sure to join us next week. That's it for today. Y'all, thanks so much for joining. Appreciate you all being here. Hope everyone has a happy Friday. Go Team USA, and happy Juneteenth again.